Welcome to News Inside. I'm your host, An Jang-hyun. Once again, we are joined by our panelists, Professor Shin Sang-yup, welcome back, as well as Professor Lee Young-eum. Great to have you back. Now let's first take a look at this week's 60-second news update.
The retirement age will be extended to 60 and a wage peak system will be implemented in 313 public companies to tackle youth employment issues. The wage peak system will provide job security for senior employees and reduced salaries will be introduced to workers nearing retirement age. The system would free up wage money which then could be used to hire younger workers. Korea and the United Nations held the 14th Korea-UN Joint Conference on Disarmament and Non-Proliferation Issues. The bilateral meeting themed Unfinished Business of Building a More Secure World focused on issues such as the implications of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Iran and reviving denuclearization talks with North Korea. The UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon expressed the urgency for efforts to rid the world of these most destructive weapons. The IMF has decided to add the Chinese yuan to its special drawing rights currency basket alongside the US dollar, euro, British pound, and Japanese yen. It is a move hailed by many as a sign that the yuan is finally a major global currency. The recent implementation of the China-South Korea FTA will further strengthen the transactions with the yuan in South Korea.
So let's start with our first story of the week. Now, China's currency, the yuan, was added to the IMF's basket of currencies known as Special Drawing Rights, or SDR. And this effectively means that the Chinese yuan is set to become an international reserve currency. Would you first explain the significance of the addition of the yuan to the SDR basket?
Yes, the IMF announced that the IMF will add Chinese yuan to its reserve currency basket from October 2016. I think this is the first time the currency, of the emerging economies was included to the IMF, the currency reserve basket. And let me tell you more details. Actually, the Chinese yuan's weight in a new basket is about exactly 10.92 percentage point, which is the third largest one after the US dollar and the European euro. Actually, the American dollar's weight in the new basket is 41.73 percentage point, and then the euro's the weight is 30.93 percent. So in fact, the Chinese yuan became the third international key currencies. Actually, because of the new status Chinese yuan will have, Chinese economy will have something good and something bad. If I tell you the first something good for the Chinese economy from the joining to the SDL basket, which is a currency basket, maybe the proportion of Chinese yuan in international transactions and investment is expected to increase very dramatically. And at the same time, the one thing which I want to emphasize as one of the negative one which Chinese will get is maybe Chinese government will not use the financial policy as they used in the past. What I mean is to promote the international, the trading, their exports. By devaluing their currency value, they could promote their exports on a short-term basis. But as one of the international key currencies, definitely Chinese government will have some difficulties in using such a kind of financial policies. This can be one of the negative aspects which Chinese government will have from the new membership of the SDL, I think.
Professor Lee, was it something that we expected to happen?
Yes, China had applied for the inclusion into the SDR back in 2010, but was actually rejected. But since then, the size of the Chinese economy has grown so much that the world could not ignore the importance of the Chinese economy in the global finance market. But I would also like to point out that just being included in the SDR basket doesn't necessarily mean that the Chinese yuan will have the global financial sort of respect and status as the US dollar or the euro. If we consider that two other currencies, the British pound and the Japanese yen, are also included in the basket, but actually are not up to par with the US dollar or the euro. So there are several things that the Chinese government needs to do in order to have that, not just the recognition status, but the muscle.
Well, some say that it is actually a victory for the Chinese central bank for pushing for reforms and pushing for the yuan to be included in this SDR basket for years. I guess its efforts have finally paid off. Could you tell us what kind of preparations and efforts China has made to this end?
Yes, that is very interesting and important point for the Korean economy as well, I think. Well, IMF, for every 5 years, they consider the total export value of the major currencies of the member countries. So how often the currencies of member countries are used, this is the first factor. So the Chinese government has made every effort to increase the frequencies of use of the Chinese yuan as a way of payment for their international trade. At the same time, the Chinese government has made every effort to proceed to ensure greater stability of the USA dollar and Chinese yuan exchange rate. This is for the creation of the large acceptance of Chinese yuan in the international community. So over the last 36 years, Chinese government tried to be integrated to international economic system. So I think this can be a good lessons for Korea whenever we try to have the Korean won as one of the international key currencies.
The Chinese central bank, though, has a responsibility, I think, to maintain with the yuan being added to the the IMF's basket of currencies. And this means that it will have to continue to push for reforms in order to build international trust in its currency, right?
In the past years, the Chinese government actually started a payment system for cross-border yuan transactions, as Professor Shin said, and also eased currency controls and opened up domestic markets to other banks, other central banks, and also the way interest rates or deposit products are determined has been eased up. So there has been some sort of easing up of the regulations, but because the Chinese government still needs to, or feels that it needs to have a relative control over its domestic finances, the easing up has mostly occurred in the trade sector with relationship with other central banks of other countries, not in the free market. And so the Chinese yuan is not currently a freely tradable currency as the US dollar or euro. Some even say the currency that are not included in the SDR basket, such as the Australian dollar, is also sometimes a tradable currency, more tradable currency than the Chinese yuan, because the Chinese government tries to limit the outflow of its currency. And so that is an area that the Chinese government needs to work on because in order to be fully recognized as an international currency and not just as an SDR basket or SDR reserve, they need to be able to sort of ease up on their control of their actual currency.
In fact, that's exactly what the IMF has demanded of China as they decided to include the yuan in the basket of currencies, right?
Yes, that's true, yes. And then, in fact, as Professor Lee pointed out, Chinese government should take make further efforts to strengthen its, currency status as one of the key international currencies in the international arena. Particularly transparency could be a matter for the Chinese government in the near future. Well, one of the very important standards to be included in the SDR basket is the improvement of status, the transparency. So some experts have some doubt about the transparency of the Chinese financial system. So the Chinese government should make every effort to improve the standard of the transparency in their financial system, I think.
Now, both of you touched upon the two criteria that are necessary for for a currency and currency of a nation to be included in the basket of currencies. Now, how it's going to affect Korea, let's talk about that. It's been 1 year since the launch of the Yuan direct trading market, and the Korea-China FTA was also recently ratified. There's no doubt that the Yuan's entry into the SDR basket will have an impact on Korea and its economy, because Korea and China, as we know, maintain very close financial ties. What are your predictions?
Well, definitely, we will have the impact from the inclusion of Chinese yuan to SDR basket. But on the short-term basis, not huge impact, I expect. But on the long-term basis, there will be, I think, the huge impact on the Korean economy. Let me tell you more details. Actually, China is #1 trading partner of Korea. So owing to the fast economic growth of China, we have benefited very much. But the UN's internationalization could provide the Korea with the opportunities to develop our industrial sector. What I mean is Korea started the direct transaction between Korean won and the Chinese yuan 1 year ago. And by the way, to maximize the benefits from the yuan's internationalization, we cannot avoid competition with the countries such as Singapore and Hong Kong to be a hub for Chinese yuan transaction. This is very important for us to maximize the benefits from the Chinese yuan's internationalization. So we have to compete with these countries to be a hub for yuan and trading center. And I think this is quite feasible because, as I said before, China has been the #1 trading partner. At the same time, the largest amount Korean direct investment goes to China. I think considering this kind of existing economic relations between Korea and China, definitely we have enough advantages in an effort to be a hub for Chinese yuan trading, I think.
Isn't it also true, though, that we are not using the Chinese yuan as much as we can?
Yes, that is true. Although trade with China is almost 25% of Korea's trade volume, the use of the yuan as a currency has gone up from 2014.
But compared to the dollar.
Right. It was 1.7%. Now it has gone up to 3.4%. So it has gone up, but not to the extent that the yuan or the extent that Chinese or trade with China is actually being conducted.
Is there a negative follow-up?
Oh, yes, I want to add about that. In fact, when we excessively rely on the relationship with China, as I said before, through the internationalization of Chinese yuan, definitely economic ties between two countries can be strengthened further. But we have to worry about a kind of some negative impact from the Chinese economy. When we rely on Chinese economy heavily, simple jitters in China can be pose a direct threat to the stability of Korean economy. So, in some sense, a diversification in the economic relations for Korean economy seems to be very important. What I mean is that we have to keep every effort to strengthen the economic ties or economic cooperation with USA and European countries and Japan. At the same time, we have to efforts to strengthen the economic ties with China. Then that is the best way for us to maximize the Korean economy, I think.
Well, with the successful inclusion of the yuan in the SDR currency basket, there are high expectations for the possibility of the Korean won becoming an international currency as well. We mentioned the two criteria that the IMF looks at to decide on an SDR currency, and one of them is that its issuing country must be a major exporter, which is a criterion that Korea meets. The other criterion is that the currency must be freely usable. How do you see Korea's chances?
Well, there have been some talk of the possibility of Korea's won being the next sort of possible candidate for being included in the SDR. But realistically, the influence of the inclusion of the Chinese yuan into the SDR basket actually might have other sort of consequences, such as the use of the market average exchange rate rather than the arbitrated rate of exchange, which is that before, when Korea traded with China, we calculated the trade amount into dollars and then into yuan, so at the global exchange rate. But now, with the launch of the FTA, we are going to have a direct sort of an exchange rate.
Well, the IMF considers several the factors when they decide to allow a country to be included. Its currency to be included as into the SDR basket. The first one, as I said before, total export value. In terms of the export value, Korea is very close to the SDL basket in some sense. In terms of the export volume, Korea is the sixth or seventh. So I think, if Korean government make efforts to expand use of the Korean won as a way of payment for the international transaction, actually this is the effort made by Chinese government over the several years. We will be able to get closer to the SDR basket. And second one is that we have to. We means Korean government should make efforts to make the Korean won widely traded in foreign currency markets. To realize this one as one of the plan. To achieve the end, to be included as to the SDL basket. I think it will require more efforts, and we will face more difficulties than the first one. But I think I have some optimistic view. Korea will be able to be one of the international currencies in the near future, I think.
Well, the IMF reviews the SDR basket every 5 years, so I guess in the meantime, the Korean government could try. The inclusion of the yuan in the SDR basket is an important milestone not only for the Chinese economy but for the global economy as a whole. We've just discussed Korea's economic prospects and future strategies in light of this latest development. Now let's turn our attention to a domestic issue. Amid expectations and concerns, internet-only banks have entered the Korean financial market. Along with that, existing banks are now turning branchless and providing more extensive non-face-to-face services, essentially opening a new era in personal banking. So let's discuss how Korea's financial services might stay competitive in light of these changes. Now, Kakao and KT have been approved to launch Korea's first internet-only banks next year. And in response to this, the existing banks are also rushing to provide more services using information technology. What kind of changes can we expect?
Well, definitely mobile and internet banking will be very common in financial service. I think, as you mentioned before, just before, the Korean banks, right now, they make a full commitment to provide the financial services in cooperation with information technology and industrial sector, which means that the face-to-face transactions are expected to be reduced dramatically. I think from the Shinhan Bank's case and other several issues, we can find it out that the Korean banking industries seem to first priorities on the cooperation with the information technologies. We call it fintech. In fact, the Korean financial sector have been behind in providing services by using the fintech, comparing with the global financial institutions.
Well, if these internet-only banks prove to be successful, isn't that going to cause a bit of a trouble for the existing banking system?
Yes, possibly. Because when we are saying internet-only banks, we're saying that they don't need to maintain branch offices or the so-called brick and mortar offices, and so they won't have to spend as much, and so they will save money there, and so they will be able to offer higher interest for the deposits, and in the case of Korea. We have the regular banking system, and then we have the secondary sort of financial market with extremely high interest rates, sometimes going up to 30%, whereas the existing banks about 5%. And then, but these internet-only banking services are considered to have the possibility of offering a middle interest of around 10%, and that's what both Kakao and KT consortiums are offering. But if we look at the overall banking situation in Korea, yes, the Korean banks have been criticized for not having made enough innovations to keep up with the technologies, but the use of online banking in Korea has actually been increasing. And even in 2014, branch offices of existing banks have closed. So yes, we still have 7,400 some, but last year, almost 300 branch offices have closed because of the increased use of online banking. So the existing banks, yes, will be affected by the higher interest rates, possibly, but they are also trying to keep up.
Can I add one thing? Actually, Professor Lee pointed out a very important thing. That is maybe the Korean banks will be able to provide the various financial products at a cheaper price, because they could save the money to run the branch offices. With that money, they can provide the low interest rate loans. I think this will be very important for the future Korean financial business. If there will be a competition in an effort to lower interest rates, maybe there will be some changes in the structure of the financial industries in Korea. Secondary financial business, industrial sector, such as the trust bank or something like that, they will not be able to keep their competitiveness edge in the competition with the big commercial banks. So I can what can I say? I want to make a forecast that there will be some changes in the structure of the financial industries in Korea because of this new emergence, the new industries in financial sector.
Well, that should be a welcome change for us consumers, though.
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Professor Shin, you pointed out that Korea is rather late in introducing non-face-to-face banking, including internet-only banks, compared to other countries. What would be the reason for that?
There could be several reasons, but I want to suggest as the first reason is the unhealthy rules and regulations. That means that in Korea, according to the current law, requires the face-to-face real name certificate confirmation system. I think this has been one of the obstacles. We have to correct it as soon as possible. Second one is it's kind of some culture in the financial sector. The Korean commercial banks have been reluctant to adopt new technologies. we can find the reason why they have been reluctant to take new technologies, new approaches in their business. But anyway, it requires the more long and in-depth analysis, but it has been one of the main obstacles for us to improve the quality of services based on the fintech-oriented approaches.
Not just Korean banks, but I think the government is rather hesitant to adopt these latest technologies as well, including biometric authentication. They opted to use personal IDs and existing bank accounts and digital certificates as means for personal verification for non-face-to-face banking for now. Couldn't that hinder the competitiveness of our banking service?
Yes, I would like to point out another technical aspect of the Korean banking system, and that is the use of the ActiveX system, or the ActiveX technologies that is proprietary to Microsoft Internet Explorer. And so that has been a factor that was could be determined an obstacle to the expansion of Korea's financial market, not just domestically, but overseas. The other aspect is that I would also like to add the trust factor, which is that, I mean, it also has something to do with Korea's culture. I mean, people like to see who they are doing the transaction
Especially
with.
when it comes to money.
Right.
Yes.
And there have been, both in Korea and globally, there have been sort of hacking incidents, leaking of names and financial data. And so those are some of the things that may sort of hinder people being more active in terms of adopting the internet banking system.
Yes, I think security is something that we're all concerned about, but so far, Kakao and KT have said that they are going to put utmost priority on the issue of security, trying to assure us consumers. How far has fintech evolved in other countries? What kind of examples have you seen?
Yes, I mean, in foreign countries, financial institutions have provided the fintech-based financial services, various services. Let me introduce some of them. The first one is, in fact, the well-known the card company. They provided the special services. I mean, we wear some rings and then watches, and we carry the
wearable devices.
Wearable devices, and then even car keys. They put some small chips in them, and then by using them, they can pay easily. I think wherever they are, and whenever they are, I mean, actually they can very easily send the money by using these technologies. I think this is one of the typical services provided by one of the foreign the financial company. Besides that, there are many. I mean, one thing which is very impressive to me is one of the services provided by one of the Taiwanese company. When they carry the mobile phone in one hand, they can make a signature in the air. Then they can pay. I think this is I think this is quite surprising, isn't it? I mean, marvelous, I think. Well, that much, there are numerous services provided by the financial companies in foreign countries by using fintech technology. So, in very briefly say that we are very behind in providing those kind of fintech-based financial services.
Well, but Korea is not actually behind, because there are many Korean companies that are involved in the development of technologies to induce online banking. And I think you can categorize these services or these technologies into three groups. One is providing services such as assisting people or giving advice to people using robots. Second is the security or the recognition technology, which is based sometimes on the device or sometimes on the bio feature of the person. So recognition of the fingerprint that the iPhone currently has, using the iris, even the scent of a person sometimes. So various technologies have been proposed. The third is the actual transaction technologies, and so there are many Korean companies currently that are involved in the development of these technologies, and also the Korean government is becoming more amenable to these to adopting these new technologies. Last year, the government ordered that the use of ActiveX be phased out eventually. That is a very positive sign that the government is accepting the fact that it is going to be an online, there's going to be heavy online use of financial services.
Well, let us indeed hope that this evolution in personal banking and fintech will live up to the hype as well as people's expectations. In Korea, a dog isn't just for Christmas, it's for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Believe it or not, this is a quote from a BBC online post. Let's now examine some of the preposterous errors that we find about Korea in international media. Now, mistakes on information related to Korea can be easily found on popular websites such as Google or even in school textbooks overseas. What sort of examples have you been able to find?
Well, personally, I think I have to say this one first. I was really surprised to see them. Well, let me introduce some incorrect information about Korea. First of all, Korea was a subject state, Chinese subject state. Not at all. We've never been a subject state to
China has tried.
Yes. And then Korea has recorded minus economic growth rates. Wow. In 1979, yes, we recorded for the first time in the recent history over the several decades for the first time. Korea has recorded the plus economic growth rate even in the 70s, 1970s and 80s. We were the symbol of the global economic growth. And the last one which I want to introduce to you is that we have several palaces in Seoul. One of the palace is the Changgyeong Palace, which used to be the Jew actually during the colonial period. The Japanese government regime tried to ruin the Korean the dignity, Korean kingdom's dignity. So they used one of the palaces as the Jew, but not anymore. No animals are living in Changgyeong Palace right now, but I can find it out some information about wrong information about the Changgyeong Palace. Well, there are so many incorrect informations about Korea.
Not only regarding historical facts, but also regarding place names or even cities and capital.
Yes. With regard to place names, there is this conflict between Korea and Japan because we are so close to each other. They are trying to sort of place claim on certain areas, especially the island between Korea and Japan, which is the source of intense conflict between Korea and Japan. And we call it Dokdo. They call it something else. The sea between Korea and Japan, we call it the East Sea, and Japan would like to express as Sea of Japan, which is not acceptable to us. So those are what we may call intentional misrepresentations.
Well, the problem is that inaccurate information like this can distort and damage Korea's image overseas. Why are these mistakes found so repeatedly and extensively?
Well, I think first of all, the Korean government, I think, failed to respond properly. In fact, in Korea, we don't have a state the agency or organization dealing with these issues. I think this is the thing which the Korean government should do immediately. Whenever we find it out there's something wrong, wrong information about Korea, I think as far as I know, the Korean government failed to respond immediately and efficiently. So I think considering the lessons which we can from the foreign countries, definitely we have a government organization dealing with these issues. To maximize the so-called efficiency in dealing with these issues, I think the government is not enough. The cooperation with the private sector seems to be very important. What I mean is that, how the Korean government, the government agency can cover all these kind of incorrect informations. So I think we have to, I want to emphasize the government should cooperate with the private sector in dealing with these issues efficiently. For example, in European countries, there is some information sharing system between the public sector and private sector. When anyone can find something wrong about their country, then they report it to the government. Then government takes some system to dealing with the issues, and they reported it to the private sector, which reported to the government. So I think there is some synergy effect in dealing with these issues. So I think this can be a very valuable lessons for the Korean government, I think.
Well, information on the internet is sometimes wrong.
Oftentimes wrong.
Right, oftentimes wrong. It's not just factual information regarding Korea. And so those individual cases of saying that the Korean hanbok is from Japan, or kimchi was
Yes.
Was a Japanese food. They eat it, but it is our food, right? So those kind of information should, I think, not be the responsibility of the government. Not even the private sector. There is a voluntary organization called VANC, Voluntary Agency Network of Korea, which was started by a couple of young students who saw these misrepresentations of Korea and decided to do something about it. They got actively involved in correcting the information or providing correct information to the relative sites or the relative agencies, and they have made a lot of progress. But the kind of information that is sometimes intentionally put out by certain groups or countries, like Japan. There are instances of Japan posting videos of Dokdo and saying that it is their land. Information like that should actually be very definitely dealt with by our government agencies as well.
Can I add something more?
Sure.
Along with these kind of efforts, to modify incorrect information about Korea very actively, yes. I think we should make another different types of the efforts. That is that we have to introduce the facts about us, our culture and our history. As far as I know, the government, Korean government has developed many programs to introduce, Korea's and Korean history and culture and everything to the foreign community, and particularly young the foreigners. I think these approaches seems to be more important in some sense. So we have to maximize our efforts to modify incorrect informations as well as providing the the accurate facts about us to the global community as much as we can.
So efforts are needed both at the private and government
Yes.
levels. A nation's image is closely related to its competitiveness, so it is essential that we acknowledge the gravity of this issue and make efforts to correct any misinformation about Korea and prevent further distortions. Well, that is all for this week's edition of News Inside. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again next week.